Welcome to Behavior Grooves, the podcast that explores human behavior through a behavioral science lens. I'm Kurt.
And I'm Tim. We like to explore why we do what we do with researchers, authors, and practitioners in a conversational setting in order to bring those insights to you.
Our desire is to bring some actionable insights to you on how you can positively apply behavioral science into your life, hopefully with a few laughs along the way.
So we're like the comic behavioral scientists? Is that it?
Comic is pretty far from anything that I would call us. Maybe we're just some behavioral science clowns.
I think that might be more appropriate. Yes. Okay. So before we introduce today's guest, we want to start by thanking you for all of your support for the podcast. The reviews, the ratings, the Patreon subscriptions, all of it are just fantastic. And we want to thank you for helping us expand our reach.
That's the truth. We are always looking for ways to reach more people who are interested in applying behavioral science to their work and life, and your support goes a long way in achieving that. The algorithms that recommendation engines use rely on reviews and ratings and downloads. So every time you leave us a review or rating, you're getting us a little closer to coming into someone's search bar when they're looking for a podcast. So thank you. Thank you very much for that help.
Yes, thank you so much for all that you do to help us. Okay, so let's turn our focus to this episode. Our guest today is Michael F. Schein, who is the author of the Hype Handbook, 12 Indispensable Secrets from the World's Greatest Propagandists, Self-Promoters, Cult Leaders, Mischief Makers, and Boundary Breakers.
Woohoo!
That's a hell of a title. He is also the founder and president of MicroFame Media, a marketing agency that specializes in making idea-based companies famous in their industries.
We had a fascinating discussion with Michael about his book and why hype is often misunderstood. We explored the idea of if the ends justify the means, which we're going to dig into more in the grooving session, as well as talking about music that I could actually be knowledgeable on. Punk.
Punk? Really? Like you called Depeche Mode punk? Like synth rock, okay. Industrial, yes. But punk? I think you're stretching things there.
Okay, so Depeche Mode isn't punk, but I had a big punk. I liked punk.
Really?
I listened to Black.
Name a punk band.
Black Flag. All right.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. Just right there. I'll just leave it at that. All right.
Okay. Good enough.
And I mean, I travel in a pretty narrow band of my music, unlike you, who has this, plethora of wide range from classical all the way to the, weird Brazilian jitsu, samba intermixed with smooth jazz, and I don't know, whatever else.
That's so much fun, though.
I'm really narrow. I do my 80s synth rock and some punk. There you go.
But Black Flag is definitely a punk band.
Husker Du, a local Minnesota band, is definitely a punk band.
No way.
When you have a 2-minute song, which is the longest song on your album, that is a punk band, and it is all just guitar and screaming. That is punk. Yes.
Okay. Well, okay. Debate later. Let's.
Okay. All right. There we go. All right. So please sit down and relax with some Black Flag or Violent Femmes playing loud in your background and a big shot of hype in your glass as you listen to our conversation with Michael F. Schein.
Michael F. Schein, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
I am happy to be here.
Yeah, we are glad to have you here. We're going to start with a speed round. Kurt, you want to get going?
I will start. So, Michael, coffee or tea?
Coffee by a long shot. I tried to switch over to tea. I even write about in the book I just published how I switched over to tea and it made me calmer, and then I fell off the wagon.
So the calm thing wasn't you, huh? Is that how that works?
The calm thing is certainly not me, which is why I should not be drinking coffee. And as we can talk about, if you want to implement some of the things that I preach, it's better to be calm. But I just really, really like coffee.
So this is definitely do what I say, not what I do.
In regards to coffee, that's for sure.
Okay, so would you rather have dinner with your favorite musician or favorite sports star?
A musician by far.
Yeah. Anybody come to mind?
Can they be Dead?
Sure.
Dead.
Yeah, that could be dead. Let's say anybody ever.
We have some magical thinking going on here. We can do that. Yeah.
Bowie.
Oh, David Bowie. Yeah.
He would be. Yeah, that's a fascinating one. All right.
Yeah.
Learn a new language or learn a new instrument?
I think I'm at a phase where I want to learn a new language, and I'm a big music guy, but I feel like it's silly that I'm not fluent in more than one language. Like, I feel like I'd really like to get there, and I've tried, and I'm not there yet.
Yeah. Well, we can beat you up on that later if that would help you feel better. But last speed round question.
I'm a masochist, or is it a sadist? I forget. I like to be beaten, flogged. I always confuse the two. Yeah.
Do you think people today are more susceptible than they were in the past?
To which part?
To hype. Do you think they're more susceptible to hype today than they were in the past?
I don't think they're more susceptible. I think human brains are human brains. I think that there are technologies that make it easier to be exposed to ideas that make you more susceptible. But no, I don't.
Great. Well, let's talk about what about technology you think is preying on our brains in a way that is altering us and altering the way that we respond to hype.
So it's funny. So we for those of you at home, we were having a conversation on this line before we started recording, and we were talking, oddly enough, about George Orwell and 1984 and how 1984 is one of my top 5 favorite books. However, I actually think that what's his name? Aldous Huxley, the guy who wrote Brave New World, I think he got it more right because, the Nazis and the communists and all of that, they used technology too. I mean, Hitler and Goebbels loved the radio. Like, that was their technology, but you could turn the radio off, and there were still a large segment of the population who had to be forced to be bombarded with that information and bullied into it and coerced into it. Whereas now we have so much technology that makes our life, quote unquote, easier. And I would say more it just distracts us. And we submit to all this stuff. Like, I don't have an Alexa because I just don't like the idea of Amazon listening to me all the time, even though I'm sure my phone does it. But people think I'm crazy. They're like, it's convenient. Why wouldn't you? So the idea is everyone is like, we're just immersing ourselves in a bath of messaging and distraction and all of these things from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to bed, and we do it to ourselves. So yeah.
Why are we doing it? Why do you think we're so compelled?
Well, I think it's addictive by design. I mean, it's the same reason you might be compelled to smoke cigarettes, if you started that at one point, drink coffee, right? I mean, I know for a fact. Really. I mean, I know for a fact that if I have more than 2 cups of coffee a day, I don't make as good of decisions. And it's subtle. It's not like if I was taking cocaine, right? I mean, right. But I'm addicted to it. It's pleasurable. And I think that these companies are very good at making things addictive. They've admitted to it. It releases dopamine. They design them like jackpot, like slot machines. So yeah. And they're fun. They're diverting. They're entertaining,
Which is what Brave New World talked about, right? It was the as opposed to 1984, which was this top-down Big Brother overseeing everything. Brave New World was, we're giving you pleasure, we're giving these entertainment, and that will calm the masses and allow us to control you, which is, to a certain degree, we have Facebook and Twitter and all the social media things. But as you said, there are other facets around this that we are inviting those components into our lives, and that invitation gives, it also acts as, if I'm inviting them, they can't be bad. And so I think there's some interesting components on that. And I think the hype aspect of it and how companies are using that can be a really subtle way of thinking about psychology, and not even so subtle. I think it's a really powerful way of thinking about psychology and what they're doing. And, is it a positive thing or is it a negative thing? And I think that's a big piece that you talk about. Right?
It's funny because when I was 15 years old or whenever, I read both of those books around the same time. I read Brave New World for school and read 1984 on my own. And I don't know how much your listeners know about these books. We're getting a bit literary, but in Brave New World, it's this society where everyone, there's promiscuity there, that's encouraged by the state. There's, and not close relationships. There's drugs, there's television all the time. And 1984 is like boot on the neck, misery, torture, whatever. So I remember thinking at the time, like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to think that Brave New World is terrible, and it is, but part of me wanted to be there. It seemed, I wasn't really such a hit with the ladies at the time. I certainly wasn't really enjoying my life at 15 years old in this place where you could just, have a harem and and everyone had the harem, the men and the women, and have entertainment all the time. So it's a function of, is it terrible? Well, no, but at the same time, these people didn't have autonomy. So it's a question of, do you want autonomy in your life? Do you want to control your decisions? Do you want to be like a child and have people making decisions for you? Or maybe a combination of both. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, that's pretty great. I'm remembering back to when I read them as well, and felt like both are absolutely about control, whether one way or the other. That is definitely it. And I think about controlling the message. You wrote about like Tim Ferriss becoming or claiming the title of a world-class kickboxer. Right. And correct me if I get this wrong, but there was something about how he wasn't really the very best in the world. He wasn't consistently a best in the world kickboxer, but he got a title, and this was a source of irritation for you, if I recall, right?
I guess it was a source of irritation. I just found it interesting whether it was a source of irritation, but also. Yeah, I wrote in an article. So I have a book, the Hype Handbook, and I mentioned Tim Ferriss a little bit. But in the article, I really criticized Tim Ferriss because Tim Ferriss is a guy who is telling you how to live your life to have a better and more efficient life. Mm-hmm. And he'll say with pride that so what he did was he decided he wanted to be the best kickboxer in the world. And he researched and found a loophole in kickboxing that said that if you make someone like stumble and put their foot even like a centimeter outside the circle 3 times, you win. But that's there kind of the way, it's a norm that you don't do that. It's a law to keep people in the circle so they're not running through the aisles like professional wrestling. But the goal is not to knock someone out of the circle. But he did that. He didn't try to be the best kickboxer. He wanted to have that title. So and he made that happen. And in the kickboxing world, that's disgraceful. I mean, that's not honorable, right? So I guess the question is winning at all costs the goal? Because he was trying to show that he thought outside the box or whatever corporate jargon you want to put there. Maybe. But at the same time, is getting the title always the goal? Or is the goal to to master something? I don't know.
Well, and you think about that from the perspective of the means justifying the ends and utilizing. It wasn't sumo wrestling. You're not trying to push the person to get them to step out.
Yeah,
that wasn't right. Really it was a rule, and he found the rule and was able to use that to his advantage. But to your point, it wasn't in the essence of kickboxing. It wasn't what professional kickboxers did, or the world-class kickboxers weren't going, ooh, this is how I win. No, they win through the whatever kickboxing is, right? The number
scoring
of
points and
scoring points in various different pieces.
Yeah.
You don't win on a technicality of, hey, I lost because I stepped out of the ring. And thinking about that to your point, and I think the bigger question here is winning, no matter how you win, the be all end all, or is it how you win that is really important? And I think companies, right, in this world of, as you talk about in hype, right, you're hyping things, and sometimes you're hyping things just to get attention, and it has nothing to do with anything else within the realm of the world. And yet it seems like we fall prey to that. As humans, we tend to fall. I go back to Kim Kardashian, right? I mean, when she started off, like, what did she do? Or Paris Hilton, I mean, these are things like they're famous because they're famous, and who cares?
However, what I like to say, the other side of this is that if you really are doing good work in the world,
mm-hmm.
and you want to learn how to promote that work and bring attention to it, of course, ethically, but instead of listening to the advice that these people give, so Tim Ferriss is an advice-giving guru. So people live their lives according to what he preaches and they don't succeed. Or even Kim Kardashian, they listen to her interviews to a lesser extent and take her quote unquote wisdom, but that's less common. But instead of sort of following their advice, observe what they do. So in other words, Tim Ferriss did not need to be the kickboxing champion of the world for money. And you would say, okay, well, maybe he did it because he's just competitive and wanted to be the best. Well, if that was the case, why wouldn't he want to master kickboxing? Why did he want to win on a technicality? It's clear to me that the reason he does things like that is because one of the principles of hype, and I talk about this in the book, is called become a magus. So if you can turn yourself into a larger than life figure who can do astounding things, and there are ways to do that even if you're not that astounding, people are more attracted to you. So instead of saying, oh, I'm going to follow Tim Ferriss and, follow his advice and work 4 hours a week and whatever, think, okay, why did he decide it was so important to do this thing and trumpet that accomplishment? And then how can I adapt that technique to get attention in my own career and do it ethically? That's always been my sort of MO and my message.
But that's hard, right? In part, what makes your message appealing to me is that it's counterintuitive, that most people are following Kim Kardashian just because of more surface reasons, right? Not for the really actually paying attention to how is she actually living her life, or what is she actually doing to, in her life, just to pick on somebody other than just Tim Ferriss. But, right. And yeah. So why is it, Michael, why is it that it's just so much easier and for so many of us just to sort of follow the surface, just to play in the surface area?
Yeah. I mean, I think for a couple of reasons. I mean, one is that it's counterintuitive, like you said. I mean, no one's really pointing that out. In other words, look, the word hype. So I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I am a proponent of hype, and I define hype as, all I define it as is generating a ton of emotion from a bunch of people so that they take the action you want them to take. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But when most well-meaning people think about hyping something up, they think of it as negatively. So on one hand, they associate hype with lying, which it's not, or with dishonesty. But on the other end of the spectrum, they just say, my stuff should live on its own merits. The cream will rise to the top. It should just get noticed on its own sake. And I think the first thing is that people need the case to be made to them that human beings and isn't this what you guys are out in the world preaching in a different way, that human beings have certain ways that their brains work, and they're not always the most accurate ways, and they behave differently in groups than as individuals, even online. And if you want to attract attention and get people emotional and buy your stuff, whatever form buying something takes, you need to understand that. And that's not a negative thing. You can use that to launch a civil rights movement, or you can use it to launch, sell garbage. But
That's right.
I think people need that case made to them. And I don't think people understand that, because very few people are making that case effectively.
Yeah, it's not the field of dreams, right? You can't just build it and they will come. You need to promote it. You need to be able to get people to pay attention to it. So tell us a little bit.
And I want to interrupt for a second. It's also different than marketing. Like a lot of people, there's not field of dreams, but also a lot of people are like, I just need to learn marketing. And when I say to them, well, what do you think of as marketing? Because I stay away from the word marketing.
Okay.
Because people will say, well, I got to build a big social media following. I have to do A/B testing. I need to test which logos and phrases work. I need to, Clubhouse just came out, the new social media. I got to crack that one. I'm on that bandwagon quick. And I got to get analytics going. And all of that stuff's important, but those are the hammers and nails and chainsaws, I mean, you still need to understand engineering and architecture, and that's human mass psychology. I mean, the ancient Romans were doing this stuff. So people start the wrong way. They start with the quote unquote marketing. To me, the hype is what gets people worked into a lather and and let's start there. And then let's figure out what technology to use. So I go out of my way to avoid the word marketing, because everyone wants to learn to be a marketer, yet they're not succeeding because they're worried about their sales funnels and their A/B testing.
Well, all right, let's go into this. So you wrote the Hype Handbook. Help us understand what big picture from the Hype Handbook. What's the main message, and what are you trying to convey with that book?
So I wrote the book. And again, I own an agency, which people think of as a marketing agency. I like to call it a hype agency, but we do these kinds of things for clients. And I did it for myself when I was starting out, as a freelance writer before I started the agency. But the reason I wrote the book, one comes from a very sort of mischievous place, and one comes from a place of really wanting to make the world a better place. So from the mischievous place, I remember when I was a teenager, there was this thing that got passed around called the Anarchist Cookbook. And in retrospect, it was a horrible thing. So this kind of hippie guy who was a radical decided he was going to give all the revolutionaries this one place where they could get all their revolutionary stuff. So it was everything from how to make a Molotov cocktail out of household materials to how to get high off of marigold seeds, anything you needed. It turned out people used this thing to kill people. It was horrible. But the concept, people would pass it around you got to see this thing. And the concept that there was this one place where all of this secret knowledge was always sort of had it made an impression on me. So I thought it would be neat to look out, and all of the people who were the greatest sort of mass manipulators, or the people who could build movements, good and bad, all of these kinds of people. What if you could distill all of their stuff into 12 strategies that you could use in any circumstance? And I think I've done that, at the risk of patting myself on the back, pretty well. So that was just something that was a cool challenge for me to do. And then there was another reason that's a little more.
Let's get into the other reason, but before we do that, I just want to say the subtitle, right? 12 Indispensable Secrets from the World's Greatest Propagandists, Self-Promoters, Cult Leaders, Mischief Makers, and Boundary Breakers, which I love. I just think that, and to your point, I think that's what you're talking about. Let's take these insights from these people, good or bad, but we can look at what they're doing, which is what I think you talked about with Tim Ferriss and Kim Kardashian as we started to lead into this. And now tell us about the good reason why we're doing this.
Well, and I think the good and mischievous reasons are connected. It was that I was watching people who I don't consider good people, who had a very big effect on the world. In particular, one person who was so good at using this stuff, and people were so susceptible to it. And I just kept thinking, there are all these nefarious characters who come to this stuff so easily. And part of that reason is that they don't get emotional about it. That was back to my coffee and tea thing. For people who let their emotions get in the way, you have to work on regulating yourself, because people like psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists, they're very good at looking at other human beings as players on a chessboard. So it's not that the tactics and strategies themselves are bad. They're just the way humans react. It's that they don't let shoulds and coulds and woulds get in the way. But it bothered me so much that these people were really enacting hype on people, and people were just responding like clockwork. I wanted to put these tools in the hands of good people, or people with good businesses, good artwork, good political causes that I consider good, because they seem to come to it more. It's difficult, it seems like, for the more well-meaning people to bring attention to their stuff, because they have so much shoulda, couldas, wouldas, and the other people come to it naturally. So that became a driving force for me, if that makes sense. Yeah,
I grew up in an environment where I just trusted people because people were trustworthy. And I remember seeing the movie Wall Street, where Michael Douglas talks about greed is good. And he basically lays out this case where humans are just pawns. People are just ways for you to get richer. And the better you are at manipulating them and at manipulating the systems, the better off you are. And that just was like, holy Hannah. That was a huge revelation for me, even in this time of the yuppie spirit and, go for everything that you can. It was still overwhelming.
Well, and even though that's like a gross point of view, I think the other layer to it is that you can either frame it as people being pawns, and that's what those kind of people do.
Yeah.
But the other way to frame it is that our brains are not designed to have an accurate view of reality. And that's what your entire podcast is about, right? I mean, we behave in a way that I guess made our ancestors more likely to survive and procreate. And we can't digest all the information thrown at us. So even if you love people, even if you want to do good things, you have to realize that if you are rationally explaining your ideas to people and expecting them to come along, you're not going to get much traction. You're just not. So you have to understand things like transcendence and why people follow certain kinds of leaders, and why certain repetitious or repetitive, I don't think repetitious is a word, repetitive phrases and images work while others don't. You just need to understand that, because human brains, for various reasons that we can talk about, are designed to cling to things based on those surface level signifiers.
Well, you gave a great example in the book about Alice Cooper's manager. We'll have to explain who Alice Cooper is to some of the listeners, possibly. They might not remember. But this whole idea of selling out Wembley Stadium, not by promoting how great the show is going to be, but by making sure that the parents who would be involved in maybe letting their kids go to an Alice Cooper concert hated Alice Cooper, which gave the kids like this very irrational, thing of course I'm going to go. If my parents don't want me to go, I'm going to make sure I go. And maybe you can tell the story of how the manager got that to happen.
Well, first of all, it's worth saying that Shep Gordon, who is still Alice Cooper's manager,
wow,
is it seems like a decent guy. Right. So here's an example of a person who I mean, I don't know him personally, but, he's almost single-handedly responsible for the kind of that culinary movement, the celebrity chef movement, which made a lot of chefs who were doing great work able to sustain themselves in what was a difficult sort of environment before that. Alice Cooper has nothing but good things to say about him. He's involved in charity stuff. So he's a good guy. He's promoting art. He's promoting food. He's promoting good stuff. But his whole idea with Alice Cooper, they rose through the ranks together. I think he might have been their drug dealer or something. I don't know. But, here he was just like this pot dealer who hung around the same hotel, and he needed a front for his weed dealing operation, which is
Perfect.
funny. Yeah. And no one should write letters saying, well, that proves he's not a good person. This was 1969. He was, whatever. So his whole theory was that he didn't want Alice Cooper to get on the cover of Rolling Stone, or he didn't care about that. He figured that every teenager, especially then, goes through a time where they're rebelling against their parents. So he wanted to get them in Newsweek and places like that as the bane of all parents' existence, as the thing parents hated the most, because he understood the principle of hype, I guess intuitively, that we're much more attracted to our tribes are formed based on what we're against, not based on what we're for. And if he wanted to create a really strong bond around Alice Cooper, he would make Alice Cooper fans feel oppressed by parents. So he did that a lot. I mean, Alice Cooper was the original shock rocker. For those of you who don't know, they used to have guillotines on stages. They used to have all kinds of crazy stuff. Also, there was a famous incident where they said he tore apart a chicken, which did not happen. Someone threw a chicken on stage and it shocked him. So he threw it back and the crowd tore it apart. But when Shep Gordon found out they thought Alice Cooper did it, he spread that like crazy, that rumor. So they were in London. They were already big in the States, but they had Wembley Arena, and it was like 2 weeks or something before the show, and only 500 seats had sold, which is Wembley Arena is very large. So that was going to be a disaster. So what Shep Gordon did is he got a picture taken of Alice Cooper buck naked, except for a snake like covering his nether regions, and he blew it up to a billboard and mounted the billboard on the back of a truck and paid the driver to have it break down. I think the guy actually went to jail, but he paid him so much money that it didn't matter. Not prison, just jail for the night, And so this giant picture of Alice Cooper buck naked with a snake was in Piccadilly Circus, which is it's like Times Square. It's the most trafficked area of London during rush hour. So there were news helicopters, a giant traffic jam. And they even brought it up in Parliament. They were like, this is a disgrace, blah, blah, blah. And parents were going crazy. I mean, this was when Britain was there was still a kind of a stiff upper lip crowd there. And they sold out Wembley Arena and became one of the biggest acts in the UK.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal to sell out Wembley.
Yeah,
especially where they were coming from. That's for sure.
Well, I love the way that was looked at, right? So to your point, tribes are based on what you're against more than what they're for, and understanding that concept and then figuring out a way to tap into that, to say, all right, how do we get these, people that are going to come to this concert? What's the tribe that we can get them around? And so what are they against, and various different things, and appearance and all of that, I think is wonderful. What are some of the other factors in the book, some of the 12 other ways that you can hype?
Well, first I want to say that, people are probably listening to themselves and saying, well, I'm not going to put a picture of myself naked and do all this shock jock stuff. But there's a way to be against things, or you don't have to be that extreme. You could say everyone in my industry thinks that it's really important to have ultra complex workflows. I mean, if it's the most brass tacks industry in the world, just some real inside baseball thing, and you say, well, I believe in simple workflows, something that to everyone else would be boring, but in your world, you're really destroying a sacred cow. That works just as well. It doesn't have to be this was rock and roll. It was the business of entertainment. So it was theatrical by nature. So some of the other, a good one that I use all the time is something that I call create a secret society. I sometimes call it the piggybacking method. Essentially, what the best hype artists do is they make it seem like all of their success is happening grassroots. When in truth, and they don't lie, they just make it seem that way. In truth, they almost always have spent a lot of time seeding a behind the scenes group of influential people who have followings of their own, who can pull the strings and make things explode very quickly. And you might say to yourself, well, how do I do that? There are ways to do that. So the way to do that, an example is when I was starting out, I didn't know anybody. And I would monitor Twitter for people that I wanted to get to know until I saw them like leak something out that was human. So in other words, there's this guy, Brian Clark, who started Copy Blogger, who in the content marketing world is huge. And he would always talk about pretty like straight ahead content marketing stuff. And everyone's hitting this guy up all day long for content marketing stuff. But a few times I saw him mention like bands that we had in common, and they were like underground bands, which I like. So I connected. I said, "Oh, you're into Joy Division? Cool." So suddenly he became a 16-year-old kid again. I talked to him about a human interest, not about what everyone else is talking about, trying to get something out of him for business. And we became, I don't want to say friends because we don't even live in the same city, but we know each other and we've traded, favors, so to speak. So, just really trying to look at how you can connect with someone on a human level and sort of putting yourself in a position to do that is really useful.
Yeah, this speaks to authenticity and reciprocity and just building relationships, right? In a very simple way.
Yeah.
So you don't think that you said that everybody needs a shtick, right? But it doesn't have to be controversial or provocative, does it? In order to be successful?
No, but it does have to be contrarian. So then there's a difference. So I think being a troll and just being controversial for the sake of being controversial can actually backfire. I mean, you see this sometimes. People who, they're not sophisticated about it. So they think, okay, I'm going to be a rabble-rouser. So they just scream all the time whenever they're talking and shout at their computer, YouTube channel, and they think that's enough. Or they use curse words, right? Or they just insult people on Twitter. That's like a surface level understanding of what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about fabricating outrage for the sake of fabricating outrage. What I'm talking about is figuring out how to jump on the conversation that's already going on in your field, whatever that field is, and then adding something new to it. Because if you're not saying something that's against the normal way of doing business, and I'm just talking in business terms, but it can be anything. It can be art. It can be whatever. Why are you even there? So in other words, what I would do is just ask myself, what is a point of view held by people in my field that's just so entrenched that people don't even question it anymore, that I honestly, in my heart, really find annoying and damaging and really angers me? And then speak out on that. Don't insult the messenger. Don't insult someone's looks. Don't curse at people unless cursing is the way you communicate, but don't do it just to be rude, but call out points of view and give a better way of looking at the world. And that works very well. Because I assure you, there are other people thinking exactly what you're thinking who don't have the inclination or the courage to say it themselves. And then you can become the leader of that new tribe. They can coalesce around you.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you talk about that, getting that different point of view, because that's really hard though for a lot of people, because we are, as you said, it's those unwritten rules that we don't even pay attention to, that we just make the assumption, or we don't even make the assumption, that they just are like, well, that's how it's done. I don't even know. I couldn't even fathom a different way of doing things. And so what I'm hearing you saying is we need to be better at actually taking a step back from the work that we're doing and really examining all of those facets to look at the underlying pieces in there, and then take a really hard look and say, what are the things that are good and what are the things that I might disagree with? And those are the things that then I can bring forth into the conversation, because there's probably others that are the same thing, or maybe they haven't realized it just because they haven't put that time and attention into focusing on those things. And so once I do draw attention to it, it will grab attention. Is that?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say a few things about that. I mean, one is this stuff is hard. I mean, a lot of things that are effective, especially from an interpersonal social point of view, are very hard. I mean, walking up to someone you're interested in is really hard. That's not natural. We don't like rejection. Selling is really hard and very uncomfortable. I hated selling. I mean, I found it really uncomfortable, but I wanted to do what I wanted to do as a living, and I just worked through it. So that's the one thing I can't give you. I mean, you need to get the help you need to get. And I don't mean the help. That sounds like going to a mental institution. I just mean like whatever. But if it means therapy, that's fine too. In other words, like if there are things, if you're just kind of like, well, I don't want to do this. I can't do this. It doesn't feel natural. Okay. I mean, that's your decision, but these things work. They're effective. Part of the reason I wrote the book was to teach you how to do it, but just as much was to prove to people that these things work by using examples and data. And then you just have to make a decision, you know? I mean, if you're going to do it, and I guess, I forget the second thing I was going to say. We were talking, I went off on that. You had mentioned something.
You mentioned underground bands, and this might be coming from the fact that you were in a punk band actually when you were younger, right?
I was in a punk-ish band that actually had a little bit of mild success, being that we had a following and a residency. I was in a series of punk bands, meaning that we were just loud and bad before that. So, I mean, my first band was called the Psychotic Koalas, and we were terrible, but very funny.
But I love the name.
It was a good name. Our big highlight was, it was when the Whitney Houston song, I Will Always Love You, was big. Mm-hmm. And we had a battle of the bands at school, and we had our friend who was a large person dress up in tinfoil, you know, like Whitney Houston's like silver costume. And he sang the a cappella version, like in a really terrible voice. And then we did a punk version of the song. So that went over well.
All right. So
that was hype. Well, so we were that, but my other band, you know, we were like punkish, but also kind of glammy and things. And that I played with guys a lot better than me. And I wrote the songs and I thought we were pretty good.
That's cool. Okay, so what underground music do you like listening to today?
Well, now I don't know. It's funny. A lot of the bands I thought I was so original for looking for have like entered the canon, you know. So it's kind of funny. It was like as if everybody was listening to like, you know, these indie rock bands when like people weren't. But I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty unadventurous when it comes to new music now, which I'm disappointed in myself. But I think it's because I don't go out. And I also don't think rock and roll's at the center of the culture anymore. I think it's just another genre, the way jazz or reggae are, you know. But my favorite band, the band that got me into it all, was a band called the Dead Milkmen, which is probably where the Psychotic Koalas, you know, we wanted a name like that. Are you familiar? You guys nodded. Not everyone knows who they are.
I've listened to the Dead Milkmen many times.
Yeah.
Yes.
They were my favorite band, and I still have a place in my heart for them. But then I just became obsessed with music. I mean, I liked all those, like, you know, I don't know, Bad Brains and Fear and the Descendants. But then the Sex Pistols, the Clash, and then I just expanded. I liked like a lot of like 60s music, but less the hippie kind of stuff. Like I like the early Stones and the early Who, and I love the Beatles, and I even like some hip hop. I mean, I was that was actually the first music I liked. We called it breakdancing music. I was into that before I was into rock. I just was a big music fan, I guess. I went through a blues thing. I just, you know. How about you guys? You guys are both music guys, right?
No, Tim is the music.
Oh, Tim more so.
Tim is the music guy.
Okay, totally the music guy.
I live vicariously through Tim.
Okay.
So there, that's.
Yeah, I remember having a roommate in college that really introduced me to the way the Brits were taking reggae and ska, you know, and so it was early Police, but Boomtown Rats, and you know,
they were great. I Don't Like Mondays. I remember that song.
I Don't Like Mondays.
Great song.
It was fantastic, and so we lived by those, and that sort of led into Sex Pistols and Clash, and a lot of that early stuff as well.
Yeah, that whole reggae ska connection was cool. I know that like there were no punk albums, so the British punks would like listen to reggae stuff, you know. Yeah, and now that ska thing got kind of corny, but it was really good in the beginning, like the Specials and the stuff the Clash did.
The Specials,
yeah, they were cool. Madness.
Well, being from Minneapolis, we, you know, I actually wasn't in Minneapolis at the time, but it's close enough in Iowa that Husker Du and early replacements, and some of those were some of the bands that kind of brought some of that punk into more of a mainstream sound, but still were having some of the background on that. But then you get the Dead Kennedys, and you get some I
forgot about them. They were one of my favorites.
Yeah, and Black Flag, and you kind of look at some of those from a punk perspective, and then as you mentioned, some of that British stuff that led into some of the stuff that I was really into, which was Joy Division, New Order, and that's great. Those kind of bands over there. So
I love this. The replacements are funny because they were like almost famous, and they would relentlessly sabotage themselves. Like, I remember my favorite story, which is so stupid, but I love it. They opened for Tom Petty, which was like the gig of a lifetime. And they went on and did Tom Petty's set. And got kicked off the tour.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
This is by the way, for those of you who are regular listeners, you'll hear every episode Kurt will say, no, I'm not the music guy. And Kurt just brought up a half a dozen great references.
Yeah, he knows exactly. Yeah.
Is this a contrarian or
I have one genre that I can talk to.
What's your genre? Like indie rock?
It's the 80s kind of underground new wave punkish kind of bands, and then Tim goes off on like this 1930s jazz thing, and then the classical composers from the 17th and 15th centuries and their differences, and to modern day folk and other things. And so I stick to my lane. I'm good in that lane. Otherwise, I'm not there. So
I mean, I'm sort of between you guys, but I would say that if I had to pick like the music to my heart, the stuff that got me excited about music for the first time, it was that music that Kurt likes. Like those bands were that was like my thing. Now, even more than like punk. I liked like all Violent Femmes and all that stuff. Yeah.
One of the best concerts I ever saw was Violent Femmes in a small little back of a bar in Iowa City, Iowa.
They're from around there, right? They're from nearby.
They're from Milwaukee. They're outside of Milwaukee, and so that was, but it was a fantastic show. And, somebody jumped up on stage and then they just stopped. And the stage was literally a foot. It was like a 12-inch stage. It wasn't a big stage. It was a 12-inch riser that they had. And then they came back on like 5 minutes later, and then the drummer wouldn't drum. And he's like, I've lost my concentration for 5 minutes.
Oh, my God.
I've lost my concentration. It was
Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, it was a fan.
Way too fussy. Just got to ask, with all your music background, do you listen to music while you work?
No, I really can't. I think I like music too much, and I'm a little bit distractible. So if I have music on, it's a way of it wouldn't be I would listen to the music. You know what I mean? Like I feel like the people who listen to music when they work most, and if you're different than this, excuse me, but the ones that I've seen are the ones who aren't like kind of obsessive about music. Because I feel like like hardcore music fans often listen to music, and for other people, it's like a sensory thing. But maybe you guys are different. Maybe you guys do listen to music when you work.
We've been tracking with this for some time. And by the way, Kurt does like to listen to music when he's working, and I don't. I like complete silence.
I like silence.
But I think we've been asking this question for some time, Michael, and I think that my observation is that even people who are into music oftentimes like some kind of ambient sound in the background.
Yeah, I get that.
And it might be, some people talk about smooth jazz, which, that
would make me so angry if I had to listen to smooth jazz that I would that would just destroy any productivity for the day. And I would break computers. It would be horrible.
Like too much Earl Clue and Bob James in your history, or what?
I don't even know what that is.
See, this is where Tim comes up and he names these names, and I'm like, dry leaves in a hurricane. They're over my head, So
I'm not a huge jazz fan. I tried. I have this memory. Okay. There was like acid. I mean, they had this acid jazz movement in the 90s, and it was like hip for a minute when I was a teenager. And there was this record store I used to go to. So I went and I bought some acid jazz albums and I put them on. And like 10 minutes later, I put them back in their cases, drove to the record store and traded them in for a Ministry album.
Oh, now there is a great band, Ministry.
Yeah, exactly. So, I couldn't do it.
Al Jurgensen is genius. And too bad he used too many drugs, but
that'll catch up with you.
Yeah.
There you go.
Unfortunately. Okay.
See,
Michael,
he went back to my lane, and I could talk
your
about
lane
that.
Is I veer from that lane, and I like old rock and roll, but that's sort of my lane too.
So what were you listening to between the ages of 13 and 16? Was it this stuff? What was it?
Stuff, yeah. I had only this stuff at that time. I mean, now I'm all over the place, but yeah, when I was 12, before I was 12 or 13, I listened to, Def Leppard and Guns N' Roses and whatever, and then I had an older cousin who was like a skater and like that cool older cousin, and he got me into the Dead Milkmen and then a bunch of other stuff. And then my mom went to the record store for Hanukkah and said, "My son is into the Dead Milkmen. Is there anything like them, but that's not satanic?" So she brought home a Sonic Youth album and a Sex Pistols album.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. Sonic Youth and Dead Milkmen, pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, well, it worked. I mean, I don't know. I mean, so yeah, between 13 and 16, it was only that stuff. And that was a time where people weren't as promiscuous with their music. I discarded all of my old material. I'm only into under alternative and punk music now. But then as I got old, it was basically those years that I was so obsessed with that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's funny that
what was the first record that you went out and bought by yourself? This is going back. Do you have a recollection?
Question. It's embarrassing because with my own money, I don't know.
Was it
I remember.
You're not going to say Olivia Newton-John or something, are you? It's not going to be that embarrassing.
But it's funny when my father got a CD player, which was new technology at the time, and we went to the record store, and he I don't know, he had $100 and he was going to buy CDs, and he told us to pick out the CDs because there was nothing to play on them, and I knew so little about music at the time. I bought the California Raisins Sing the Hits.
Okay, that is embarrassing. That is. I have no words.
For some of our listeners, the California Raisins were a advertising thing to sell raisins. And they were these little,
because they were singing. I heard it. They were saying
it through the grapevine.
Yeah.
But then they expanded into I don't know, Land of a Thousand Dances or something. Oh, I also bought when I was little. I remember the WWF version of Land of a Thousand Dances. That's why I wear the Iron Sheik and all of these people were singing, the different parts. So that was another one I liked a lot.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Right. I think we need to cut it off here because this is going even too crazy for us. Michael, thank you. This, I think you bring a really interesting perspective on this. And to your point, hype is something that I think most people think of as negative. And I think you bring a contrary perspective to that and some really good insights. So thank you for being on the show and for writing the book. And for our listeners, go out and get it. It's a good book.
Well, thank you guys for having me. And also it was fun to sort of beyond the awesome questions and the really in-depth conversation. It was fun to have a chance to just geek out about music, which I don't get to do a lot anymore.
None of us get to do it enough. I think all of us need a little bit more time just talking about music to just get our juices going again. So thank you, Michael.
I've started to realize that I just, people don't want to hear it as much as I used to think they did. So now I think on a show like this with your listeners, it was fun to be able to do that. Yeah.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I groove on what we learned with our discussion with Michael, have a free-flowing conversation, and talk about whatever else comes into our hyped-up minds.
Hype. Man, he does put an interesting spin on hype, because I always had a bad connotation in my mind with the word.
Well, hype has that that kind of history, right? Like hype is not necessarily a good thing in most people's minds. And so it's an interesting take. It's an interesting take. You didn't even notice I said minds instead of brains, did you?
I didn't. Were you intentionally trying to fool me?
No, I wasn't. I realized that I used to mix it up more, and I don't know, past 6 months, I think I've said brains every time. I wanted to see if minds were different. Yeah, there you go.
It was such a subtle move. It was a lateral arabesque. It was really just lovely.
So what the hell is a lateral arabesque?
It's just what my old boss used to talk about when it came to just making a slight little move that just, kind of throws things off, but perfectly.
Oh,
yeah.
I like that. We've talked about the impact that words have and the idea that changing one word can actually change people's perceptions of a product, of a person, of an event, and subsequent behavior with that as well. So I like that. What was that called again?
A lateral arabesque.
Arabesque. All right.
Which is a dance move. So
it is.
Yeah.
It's a lateral one, I take it.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my God, we are digressing already. This is a crazy one. All right, what do we want to groove on here, man?
Let's start our discussion. Who the hell knows where it's going to go? But let's start our discussion on 1984 or Brave New World. Right? First of all, let's just agree that what we're living in right now is pretty damn nearly dystopian.
It is not. I will argue with that. I don't think it's dystopian. It's getting closer to dystopian.
Okay. Well, how much closer do we need to get to actually reach dystopia?
Well, I think, we are the vast majority of people, and this is the case, I think, across the board. The vast majority of people get along. We like each other. We have jobs that are going, well. There's obviously people who are hurting right now because of the pandemic and everything else. But for the vast majority of people in the world, life is going on, and we're surviving and we're doing well. Granted, if you looked at social media and you looked at news and you looked at some of those things, but again, if you think about the number of people that stormed the Capitol, right?
Yeah, small number.
Thousands out of 330 plus million people in the United States.
Agreed.
Those are small numbers. They get hyped up in order, and then we take a different perspective of them. So that's a piece that, I think is interesting.
Fair enough. And okay. It was bad for me to be looking at the glasses half empty side of that. There's certainly a glasses half full side of it.
All right.
So
for our listeners, we would think or hope that most of you have read 1984 and Brave New World, fantastic books. 1984, George Orwell, written in 1949, so right after the World War II. Was there, but Brave New World was actually written in 1932 by Aldous Huxley, and again, both of them foretelling these future states that are dystopian in their living, but two different ways of looking at that, which is really interesting. And we talked a little bit about it in the show. 1984 is Big Brother. It's totalitarianism. It's mass surveillance. It is this idea of lies are true and truth is lies, and double speak, and all of these elements that are in there, and everything is political. And Brave New World is again, the environment is engineered so that people are
falling in line. Yeah.
They're falling in line, but they're also this element of they live in kind of a forced bliss that this is,
right. What they thought was, or what was conceived as blissful by, having sleep learning and being psychologically manipulated. Yeah.
Well, you didn't have autonomy, but you were living in a world where, hey, you had sex and drugs and television. I mean, it seemed kind of, not a bad world. As Michael said, 15-year-old boy doesn't sound too bad, right? To live in a world where,
which is about when I read it.
Yeah, which is about when I read it too. I think that's maybe the market for it.
But that also makes me think about: would we rather know the truth that upsets us, or live blissfully without it?
Willful ignorance.
Ignorance. Yeah.
If we think about this idea, the psychology of willful ignorance, this idea that we will willfully ignore information that is going to cause us cognitive dissonance, this is not that far off, right?
No,
the idea that we would do that. Cognitive biases are very real in allowing us to live our life without knowing the truth, as long as we feel happy and that aligns with what we feel about ourselves.
Yeah. Here's another sort of these. Maybe these are false trade-offs, right? It's not a 1984 world versus a Brave New World, right? I mean, these were just two things that came up early in our conversation. But would it be? Let me ask you this, Kurt. Would you like to have a guest on as a podcast guest who is a complete asshole, but is also a huge influencer in social media and could have a huge influence on a positive influence on the number of people that get exposed to our podcast?
Which is this concept of, does the ends justify the means, right?
Yes. Yeah. Another somewhat false, equivalency. But on the other hand, we get faced with these kinds of questions, right? And so, is that a hype thing? Do we say, let's go for the promotional side of it at what might be some kind of personal sacrifice, or do you just say, let's just suck it up? I mean, really, it's an hour's worth of conversation. It's some production time, and who knows? There might be a silver lining in there.
Well, and to the point, it comes down to, these are where the nuances come into play, right? Because, all right, is it just because he's a dick and an asshole? And I made the assumption that it's a he.
Yes,
but
of course.
this idea of, all right, maybe his concepts aren't that bad, or what he's talking about isn't bad. That might be one way, and I would say maybe we suck it up for that, right? We get a big audience, we potentially expand. There's maybe some learning that goes on with that. On the contrary, what if it was somebody that had millions of followers and they wanted to be a guest, but what they talked about was contrary to our belief? That they said, the world is flat, and that they want to come on and talk about this flat world that we have, or the idea that you can tell our personalities through reading our palms, and if everybody just had their palms read, you would be a much better world, and that would be the way it is. And you and I are not, as we've talked about, we're not gotcha journalists. We're not confrontational, and so we wouldn't probably. I don't know. Maybe it would need to be where we change the way that we operate to get that person on. But would we do something like that?
It would be those are hard decisions to make, and I think I'd kind of go back to Max Bazerman's model of utility. Where are we serving the greatest good? And if there's a lot of if really the primary benefit is for us and not for sort of the edification of our audience, I think I'd have a hard time with that. I think I'd have a hard time agreeing that it would be okay to have a flat earther on. If there was something that was particularly interesting about their perspective that might lead to some interesting conversation, then maybe. But it would be difficult for me to. And, I say this at the risk of saying I don't want to be exposed or spend any time with somebody who doesn't agree with my beliefs, but this is just science. This is, in this case, this isn't like some kind of religious belief that I have. This is just, the world is not flat. And so for someone to come on and say the world is flat would be very difficult for me.
It is objectively false. and you
Yes.
can point to a number of different evidence. They knew the world was round hundreds of years ago. The Greeks were able to do that with whatever the well in Egypt. I forget what that well was called, and the sun and solstice and all sorts of different pieces of that, just looking at shadows and various different pieces. But I digress, right? So
I think this is a big digression.
Yeah, it is. This whole thing has been a big digression. So here's another question going down this rabbit hole that we're going down. All right, so maybe not a flat earther, but maybe a QAnon believer.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Where it isn't necessarily so easy to objectively say that, yes, your belief system is 100% false. Would we allow that person on because they would benefit us in the long run? Does that bode well? And it's kind of contrary to, our political beliefs, but also just from a objective truth piece, there's something missing there, but maybe not as clear as, say, the flat earther.
Well, what can we learn? One of the underlying principles of behavioral groups is to expand the community of people interested in applying behavioral science. Is there an application of behavioral science in a conversation with a QAnon believer, or would they just be a guest that wants to come on and just promote conspiracy theories or a specific conspiracy theory? And I think that gets in, if their objective is to simply promote a conspiracy theory, that would be in conflict with what we're about. That would be easy for me to justify not having someone like that as a guest.
And we know, this is part of this. We know that just being exposed to some of these false ideas, those false ideas stick with people. And so, are we adding to this confusion that is out there in the world by having that person on? Are some of the listeners going, oh, well, they talked about this and that's real, because they forget to say that, oh, no, that's not true. As we go forward, it's a crazy piece, right? To think about.
Yeah, we've also had people on who are in support of and against the concept of the replication crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have argued there isn't a replication crisis. It's just new. We're adding more nuance and more information to our knowledge base. And other people have said, no, the data's shit, and we've got problems. And you can't if you can't replicate it, then it's not real.
Yeah.
And so we've had those sides of it as well. But I do feel like in those cases, this is a healthy debate within the scientific community around, not just around perspective or belief system. It really comes down to how do we go about it. It reveals a question about how do we go forward on replicating.
Yes.
Research projects.
And
right?
And I think there is an element of that where you can look at interpretation as opposed to objective truth or fallacy of that. And within interpretation, I think there's always nuance of hearing from both sides and trying to figure out, all right, how do I interpret this and how do I look at this? And are there different perspectives that I need to be taking? And to that, we're adding, hopefully, to people's ability to understand and to think through and to formulate an opinion on their own in that sense. And I agree with that. It's going back to some of the things that we talked about with Michael, though, this idea that, like, Tim Ferriss, right?
Yeah.
Taking a winning the world champion or whatever championship it was that he won in that kickboxing thing by exploiting technicalities in the rules, and then doing that. It gets again to this element of, do you allow for people? Is it okay to do that because you won? And even though you won through what would be not necessarily cheating, but not in a way that is in alignment with what most people would consider a good, positive way of doing that, thinking about, again, do we expand this podcast by, false claims around what it is, or bringing in controversial people just because they're controversial and don't add to the element, but ultimately it grows our audience, and then we can bring in this real piece. Is that something that we would be okay with?
I think you ask a good question in that regard, because, and I would also use Donald Trump, not from a political perspective, but as a businessman, he's had a lot of failures, but he's also had some successes, and he's been able to sell a story overall of his tremendous success, and so there have been times, there's been things brought up about his past where he, cheated people, but overall, he's not been punished for that, and Tim Ferriss has not really been punished overall for making these claims, because he actually did achieve the title, but it was through this very nuanced and technical weaving of the rules, and so I don't think that our societies have been terribly good in modern day to punish cheaters, to punish people, because I think that our social fabric is pretty damn strong, and that we're going to keep people, and diverse. So we're going to find ways of keeping people in the social fabric, more often than not.
I go back to some of the evolutionary psychology pieces, thinking through this, and that we are wired around fairness. And so in small groups, I mean, you look at the capuchin monkey experiments that Franz de Waal does, right? Where you give them one monkey a cucumber and you give the other monkey a grape for doing the same thing. And you see that response, that YouTube video that is out there. And I think that works in a small community. I think where it breaks down is we have almost 8 billion people on the earth. And how is that fairness then done? And then when you have success with things, people are just looking at success, and they're not necessarily looking at how do you get that success. It's a crazy world. And I think that ends justifying the means is a slippery slope to a certain degree. But as you said, we're most of the time, and maybe I'm just looking at outcome bias here, that the survivorship bias, of people succeeding through maybe not so good means, and yet they're still successful. They still have huge people following them, admiring them, and looking at them. So it kind of weighs on you and goes, well, if they're doing it, maybe I should do it. And that's how I get ahead.
So let's play that back into the Alice Cooper story, where Wembley Stadium is not sold out. Shep Gordon has a brilliant idea of, if I can get the parents to hate Alice Cooper, then I'm sure that the kids will love him, and pays a guy to go out in Piccadilly Circus and have his truck break down, so to speak, right? And then the guy gets arrested and spends the night in jail for this action. And there's a little bit of, well, it was okay because he got paid for it. He kind of knew what I'm talking about the truck driver,
okay,
because he knew what he was in for. I get Michael's argument that this was a brilliant strategy that Shep Gordon came up with to get people to buy tickets to see Alice Cooper at Wembley. On the other hand, there was some cost to it as well. That this truck driver ends up, getting arrested, has a record because he got put in jail for this obstruction, and there's a little bit of I don't know how good that is. And plus all the irritation that it caused drivers in Piccadilly Circus. I can only imagine that was painful.
That's the piece, right? Is you are benefiting yourself with the cost to others. It's that concept. And I'm less concerned about the truck driver, I think, than the cost to all of those people who knows what was going on. Maybe somebody missed a really important meeting because they were stuck in a traffic jam and they might have lost a job. Somebody might have missed a date that might have led to a future romantic relationship that led to a wonderful life. And regardless, even if it wasn't anything those big, the irritation of having to spend an extra 15 minutes in traffic across hundreds, if not thousands of people, just so that you get the publicity to sell out. Now, was there benefit of that? All the kids that got to go see Alice Cooper, they probably enjoyed it. They might not have realized that they would have enjoyed it so much. So again, going back to this utilitarian thing of Max Bazerman, how do you weigh that? How do you measure the value versus the pain? And it's tough. So those are questions that I think are always subjective in nature. And it's hard to get an objective measure to say, yes, the utility of this outweighs the cost.
Yes. Yeah, that's the question. But one thing that we don't have to question is the fact that this was maybe the first guest that brought up ministry.
There we go. Right? So before we go there, I just one thing that Michael said that I have taken out of this that I think is just brilliant is, and I knew this, but he said it very eloquently. He said, our tribes are formed based on what we're against, not based on what we're for. That again, thinking about the Alice Cooper incident and getting, we're against our parents' authoritarian to us, and so if our parents don't like somebody, we obviously must like them. And I think that that's very true. And so, from a perspective, if we're in thinking about our world, either business or even our personal world, it's good to examine that, and it's not always a positive thing. So particularly as we think about the politics that's going on today, I love those concepts, and we've talked about it with the messenger effect in different pieces. But if something is said and it is attributed to the opposing party, we hate it. If it's said, but it's from our party, then we love it. And it should be based upon the content and the merit of the content. But instead, our tribes are really formed not so much about how good our content is, just as long as it's not the content of the opposite tribe. And that,
this is the Bill von Hippel thing of evolutionary psychology. We don't have to be the best looking, strongest, most successful, brightest guy in the world. We just have to be better than the worst ones in the tribe.
Yeah.
Right. So that we get picked at least more than somebody else.
Yeah. There you go. And that brings us to ministry.
That brings us to ministry. First guest. I think this is the first guest who voluntarily brought up ministry.
I believe so. And I'm thinking that, that's a pretty fun thing for me. Again, it was in my narrow bandwidth of bands that I could talk intelligently about. So
you just find your happy place at that moment.
It was the first time I felt like I actually had something intelligent to say in the musical conversation. So
you always have intelligent stuff to say. You've always got good questions and good thoughts around music. I always love your questions about music.
Oh, you are too kind. You are too kind.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah,
I'm totally serious. I think that especially I've got some training in it, and a real passion about it. I don't just like listening to music. I love listening to music. I really, we talked to Koen Smets a bunch of times, but it's like, I was the kind of kid that looked at the album notes and was like, well, who produced this record? Oh, okay. So that was this guy. That was Ron and Howie Albert. Okay. What else did they put? Oh, they worked on the Bee Gees record. Oh, so I listened to the Bee. It's like, well, let's see, who engineered that? Oh, well, that engineer also worked on this. And I would follow that stuff on all these back roads that I found fascinating and rewarding.
Okay, so I just have to say, I don't know if it was on Twitter or LinkedIn that Koen just sent something to you about who's the band that just broke up?
Daft Punk.
Daft Punk. And he had this part of music that he was saying, I don't even understand what he said about this music, but something they did. And And I listened to it and I could not tell for the life of me what was going on. And it was like this whole thing, and it was slowed down multiple times and saying, look at what they did. This was, and you commented in on it, and you're like going, this is masterful, and looking at the 7/18 or something. And I'm just sitting there going, I can't even tell what you guys are talking about, much less comment on it.
So in 8 bars, there's 3 chord changes. And okay. And so in the first song that they wrote, they use all 8 bars with a whole bunch of stuff going on to make those 3 chord changes. And then in the second song, they go back and they just take 3 of those bars and they rearrange them. They change the order and they change the number of time that each of those little samples get produced to create an entirely new song with exactly those 3
I thought it was the same
bars.
song. I thought that was all within the same song.
I think it's different.
I thought it was all within the same song. That is the one song. We'll have to go back. We'll look and we'll let you know in the show notes, folks, because this is getting way too crazy. People they're tuning out at this point. So
they're already gone.
They're already gone. We're just talking to ourselves. All right.
We're only talking to people who are joggers. We're talking to Nuala Walsh, I think, at this point, because she runs for more than 30 minutes.
And she can't turn this off. Sorry, Nuala. All right. Well, with that, stay tuned. Tim's going to talk bonus track here soon.
This is Tim with our bonus track and groove idea for the week. Our discussion with Michael brought up some philosophical questions that made Kurt and me contemplate our beliefs on a variety of fronts. Our conversation started by talking about if the world is more like 1984 or A Brave New World, and which would be better to live in. We went on then to discuss how Tim Ferriss won a kickboxing championship, even though he is not the best kickboxer, by exploiting a technicality in the rules. This led us to discuss asking the questions like, do the ends justify the means, and what are the ramifications for this sort of behavior? We then talked about what hype is and why it has a bad name. Michael looks at hype differently from the norm. He thinks that hype is identifying areas that are ripe to bring a new, fresh, but often controversial perspective. There are parts of hype that can be sensational, such as the discussion we had about Alice Cooper selling out Wembley Stadium in London. He did not do it by normal means. He did it not by getting on the cover of Rolling Stone to engaging kids and thinking that he was cool, but by getting coverage in the mainstream press that pissed off the parents. Having her parents disapprove of Alice Cooper meant that he was cool. The idea of our tribes are formed based on what we're against, not what we're for, is key to this idea. And that leads us to the groove idea for the week. We want you to create some hype about something that you're doing. Create some hype around a project or a product that you're working on by generating some factual but possibly controversial information. What are those things that would push convention and would cause people to pay attention to you in this busy world? We're going to try something here at Behavioral Grooves next week, so pay attention to see if you can figure out what we are trying to do to grab just a little bit of hype. And if you figure it out, let us know on Twitter, and you can win a Behavioral Grooves coffee mug. A real life Behavioral Grooves coffee mug. We will ship it to you no matter where you live in the world. And with that, we hope you go out and find your groove this week.